In January 2015, the first State of the Bay Research Symposium was held at the Alaska Ferry Terminal on Bellingham Bay. The purpose of the all-day event was to enhance communication and coordination between various agencies, organizations, and citizens involved in the protection of Bellingham Bay. The symposium brought together researchers, managers, and interested citizens who are all connected to the future of the Bay. The symposium featured 7 distinct topics, including Bellingham Bay Yesterday and Today, local key issues, challenges, and research needs, physical processes, chemistry and water quality, biological ecosystems, regional research perspectives, and moving forward with limited funding. We will present the State of the Bay Symposium in 7 parts. This is Part 7, Moving Forward with Limited Funding.
Okay, let's go to our last panel. We wrap things up. John Hutchings is going to facilitate this sort of synthesis panel, and I'll introduce him. John is a soil scientist and a hydrologist by training. He has worked on a number of complex water supply and water quality issues around the West, including nitrates in the Spokane Valley Rathdrum Prairie Aquifer, carrying capacity of the Eastern Snake River Plain Aquifer near Boise, and water rights and water allocation in central Nevada. He serves as Assistant Director of Public Works here in Bellingham for the city, and is responsible for the city's water resource programs. So, John, take it away.
Okay. All right, great. So this is where we get to do a little bit of work and hopefully a little bit of audience interaction. This is the panel where we talk about what next. In other words, try and synthesize the observations that were made this morning from sort of the policy folks with the physical, biological, and chemical subject matter experts. And so we have a panel of facilitators from all of those subject matter this morning, including Eric Grossman from the USGS, and Christopher KREMBS from the Department of Ecology, Jude Apple, Western Washington University, Shannon Point, Carl WEIMER, Council Member WEIMER from the Whatcom County Council, and Ken DZINBAL from the Partnership, and Jeremy FREIMUND from Lummi Natural Resources. And what I think I would like to do today is first sort of poll the facilitators about what they heard from their panels, and I'm going to try, as they're doing that, to quickly jot some of these things down on the overhead, with the idea that we will get some of those ideas out and then turn to the audience and make sure that we have some interaction and capture some of your ideas as well. And that should give us a basis, the conference plan basis, to go back and contemplate these ideas, contemplate these research needs, and sort of figure out what comes next. Because really what we would like out of this is some kind of actionable map going forward. And before we get to that, the question kind of dawned on me as I was listening today. My background is more in the lines of sort of applied research. And what we heard today was a mix of applied research with the more basic fundamental questions about how things work, how natural systems operate. And as we get into this conversation, I suspect we're going to end up mixing sort of these basic research questions, the basic research questions with the more applied science. And I think it would be worthwhile just kind of keeping in the back of our head that distinction, because both are equally as important, right? Somebody has to understand how these natural systems work in order for us to understand the implications of our footprint, and ultimately resolving the questions about how to undo our footprint is more of an applied science kind of question. And so where I come from, in the policy world these days anyway, I'm perhaps a little more focused and a little more interested in answers to how we fix some of these problems. So just keep that in mind as we have this conversation. So let's just begin at the policy level. We'll go right through the order that we started today, and perhaps summarize, beginning with you, Councilmember Weimer, some of the principal questions that came up. Okay.
All right. Are these on?
I think those are
Okay.
Yeah.
Afternoon.
Wherever you went, here's the microphone.
There was a number of things that we heard on our panel this morning. You know, we heard from a number of the different local governments that deal with these things. We heard about a whole range of cleanups that are going on around the bay. We heard the city of Bellingham and the county certainly is starting to spend millions of dollars on stormwater issues, what's getting dumped into the bay. And the county in particular focused on things that are coming down the Nooksack River that end up in the bay that are impacting things like Shellfish Bridge at Portage Bay. And then we certainly heard strongly from the tribe on how all this stuff that's getting dumped in the bay has affected their way of life. So those were the big overarching things I heard. Sitting here for the rest of the day listening to things, I ended up with more questions than answers. Darn scientists, they just generate more questions. Like I heard, I think it was Eric that was talking about the change in where the river is getting dumped out at the mouth of the bay, how it has moved to the west. And he posited that that might be directing more fecal coliforms onto Portage Bay shellfish beds. That was an interesting thing. I was dying to ask the ecology person whether they've ever tried to overlay the fecal coliforms at Brennan based on the change of the river timing, and would we be better off working on that log jam, changing where the river comes out versus trying to talk to 12,000 people that own septic systems up the river. Lots of clear issues like that. I heard lots of stuff coming down the river that was a concern, whether it was sediments. We have to be careful what we talk about, because if anybody heard comments about sediments at the mouth of the river being problems, the county council will be full next week with people that want to dredge the river from Everson to Deming. So we have to make sure we're clear on what we're talking about. I heard a lot about chemical constituents coming down. I know when we were going through the WEIMER process 10 years ago, there was a big effort to look at what chemicals were in our fresh water. I don't think we're doing that at all now. I heard ecology mention that they're starting 6 sampling sites. It was great to hear of all the chemical sampling going on in the bay, but we're not doing that in the fresh water. We don't know about pesticides, herbicides, pharmaceuticals, all those other things. There was a plan at one point to look at macro invertebrates to see the health of our fresh waters. That got abandoned because it cost money. That seems to be a big place that we need to look to. So that was me with my county hat on, and our jurisdiction is mainly upriver. Is that what you wanted, John?
That's what I wanted. That was perfect. Who's up? Yes, sir.
Well, you heard the dirt from me. I did talk a lot about sediment. I think a few things came up, whether it was the sediment work that I talked about or the nutrient work that Carl mentioned. It's pretty complex. There's a lot of moving parts down our watersheds. Seems like there is a fair number of study sites that are being examined, but whether they capture the sort of the variability that we want to know and at the right sort of places along the reaches that we're concerned with, I think there's a fair amount of work that could be added to the Nooksack watershed. Skagit watershed is sort of a good template for that. There's a lot of new thinking going on about how to monitor certain processes and conditions along that system. We heard from Terang that the modeling that can be done is very powerful, yet hasn't been maybe evolved here in the Bellingham Bay area, and it's a very complex system, mixing the ocean water through these San Juan Islands and all this, morphology that's mixing up the flows. And we have this huge Fraser River plume right nearby us, so modeling would be a pretty important thing to advance here. I think you got probably the easy story from Jim. He's does that applied research. He has some good guidelines being developed, and I think he knows sort of what's needed. I think I'd kind of let him expand on that. But I'll just end with one idea. Is I heard a lot today about a number of different approaches going on, and it seems like we need a portfolio of status and trends type of work, but we also need a portfolio of really hypothesis-based or sort of process-based model approaches to looking at some of the questions that were raised, such that we can better predict in the future. And I feel like there's a lot of monitoring that's sort of discussed, but it doesn't necessarily advance those sort of process-based predictive models as well as it could if we start with sort of that. So I like the approach of developing a model first, see how it runs, find its weaknesses, and then tailor a monitoring plan to address those. And so as much as we can get some of these folks that talk today and others interested to come together maybe a few more times, really sort out a few prominent questions to begin answering, whether it's climate change effects or the DO problem. I think it's worth it to then develop a monitoring plan in Bellingham Bay to address those. So, thanks.
That's great. Yes, Chris.
Okay, I tried to summarize the water quality in chemistry. Sort of what I took from that is that there are influences that operate on very different temporal and spatial scales. And Bellingham Bay is not just this uniform bay that is easily described. And the influences sort of operate on very different, in different regions. So in the north we had the sediment influence, near shore we had sort of stormwater and all the toxins that might introduce on the benthos, which is much more influenced also from water exchange coming in from other regions in the estuarine circulation. We saw some declines that are not driven necessarily by toxins, but more sort of changes in the community structure. There might be a link with the sediment. If you go further to the south, the Samish River, we saw in aerial photography, we see a lot of organic material. That's where we see the big blooms. The north is much more influenced by sediment and attenuation of light. You don't see so many blooms. I think, and I believe in the power of creating a conceptual drawing that outlines Bellingham Bay, makes it unique for everybody, sort of accessible with the challenges, the trends, but also sort of defining zones where certain factors are sort of have a larger influence. So in that way, you really sort of pull the community together to have a visual ownership of what the problems are and being able to communicate that also to non-scientists, I think in a very powerful way. And I hate to say that, I have to make advertisement for this again. And the reason for it is not this drawing, but during my PhD 10 years ago, and it's a little more, I made one drawing and it was on the web. And it is used everywhere in the world for teaching oceanography, and I haven't done anything. It just has my name at the bottom, but it pulls sort of people together, having a visual, conceptual idea what is going on. And I think for this community, Bellingham Bay, make it unique for Bellingham Bay with Mount Baker in the background, everything. But I think it's very powerful in uniting sort of efforts and also visually describing and prioritizing in certain regions in Bellingham Bay what you think should be changed. So that's my take-home message.
So see if I got this right. That was very good. So what I wrote down is conceptual model of influences and factors on the bay, sort of a bay-specific education and outreach something, regime, I don't know what the right word is, but is that sort of
and capturing our understanding of the bay and the sort of the pressures and influences in different regions. So you have to really sort of think about what you put on there.
Yeah. Very nice. Thank you so much. Jude, are you next?
Yeah, sure. And I'm going to speak in the microphone because I've been scolded enough today. I'll sit in Eric's lap. Hey, Eric. He's done it. I've got two observations. One is looking across the 3 different sessions. Are you comfortable here?
He's a father of 3. He knows how to study.
So two things. One, looking across the different sessions, and I have to step back for a second. When we organized the different sessions, we decided to break it into this physical, chemical, and biological ecosystem processes, just because we have to divide it some way. But we don't want to create sort of arbitrary boundaries between these. So one thing I noticed looking across sessions is there were these different touch points. Such as when Terang mentioned they have their model, which shows DO and how it should behave in Bellingham Bay, and then I have some real-time data that does something similar but also different. Or with the water quality data, there's these different overlaps, and what that reminds me is that it's really critical for us to come together in situations like this, where as a scientist, I can hear what other people say and recognize opportunities for collaboration and data sharing, which is something that I think can emerge out of this for many people. So that's one sort of bigger scale take home for me, is that this type of thing is important, especially if we come together at the end and do some synthesis. The other thing that I want to add, which is very similar to what Christopher was saying, which doesn't surprise me. Great minds think alike, and so do ours.
I'm embarrassed.
So, and when I was trying to come up with a way to sort of introduce the ecosystem scale session at the end, and how do I, mapping out these connections, and how do I bring eelgrass and salmon and sea stars and hypoxia all together, and where are the arrows, and do we have numbers for those arrows? It was really challenging, and I think the last session was sort of these independent states of research and not as much connection between those. And so one thing that I think would be valuable, following up on what Christopher said, is generating a conceptual model of these interconnections for Bellingham Bay, not just conceptual, but when we have data, assign values to those connections. That would be a really great way to come together. So I would certainly second what Christopher said about making something unique for Bellingham Bay that's conceptual, not just your arbitrary marine food web of the Pacific Northwest. Thanks, Eric.
Right. Okay, so in addition to having the sort of the topical questions, there is sort of a broader question about how Bellingham Bay fits into the sort of the cultural, the Lummi Nations cultural sort of backdrop. And we heard from Randy Kinley this morning a little bit about how that goes. And there are, I think, an array of research needs and interests that are specific to that, answering some of those questions, both from a technical side and perhaps from a cultural side. I don't really know. But Jeremy, you would be the one to perhaps offer a few thoughts about that.
Well, I'm certainly not the person to offer you anything on the cultural side.
You've got to know a thing or two.
And Randy had to take off and took all our notes and everything with him. Didn't tell me he was leaving, so I'm well prepared. But in terms of things where I see as where there's some information needs are really to look at what happened in the watershed between 2004 and 2008. In 2004, there had been for those of you who don't know, there had been a total maximum daily load study done, excuse me, and targets set for fecal coliform bacteria throughout the lower Nooksack River. And those goals were less, or that is, more protective than the state water quality standards. And so I think a lot of people looked at that and thought they were going to be really challenging to achieve. And it's true, they were challenging to achieve, but the fact of the matter is that they were achieved in 2004. And as you saw in some of the graphs that were shown, the water quality in Portage Bay correspondingly improved, and the shellfish beds were reopened in 2006. Okay, starting in 2008, fecal coliform levels in Portage Bay started to go up, and that was aligned with what we were seeing in terms of fecal coliform data in the watershed. So something happened in the watershed. The channel shifting may be a contributing factor, but the fact remains that there are very high fecal coliform levels being observed in the watershed today. And so was it a lack of compliance enforcement inspections? Was it a lack of whatever, desire by the population, the community? or what something changed. And so in my mind, that's an area that should be explored further. Another part, it has been alluded to here, is that shift in the Nooksack River channel. The primary channel has shifted to the west, probably about a mile. And that's interesting both because of the fecal coliform, but also on the sediment distribution. A lot of the cleanup plans in Bellingham Bay, if not all of them, rely on some level of natural recovery, which is where you have sediment that is, from the river and it's deposited over the contaminants. There's some element of natural recovery in most, if not all of those. And so all of the data that was used to come up with the estimates and for all of that natural recovery and all those projections for the future were all based on data, or largely based on data, that were collected when the Nooksack River discharged 1 mile further east. So what are the implications of that shift in the river on cleanup plans? And I would be remiss to my good friend Bert if I did not mention the need for basic data collection that was mentioned here earlier, because we need a circulation model that can provide reliable results, and that would require reliable wind data, wave data that can be used to calibrate some of these models and make sure the whole concept of garbage in, garbage out, that's true today as it ever has been when it comes to computer models. And so we need to ensure that we have reliable data that can support knowledge-based decisions about management plans. A point that was made by Christopher was about the flagellates and how the shift from diatoms and result in a lot of flagellates. That has a real big impact on tribal fishers. What happened, I'm not a fisherman, tribal fisherman obviously, but I remember about 2-3 years ago, there was a lot of flagellates in the water, and people, basically it clogged all their nets. People were fishing, they were complaining about having to spend literally as much time cleaning their nets as they were fishing. And so that's has a number of other implications I just want to bring forward. And if Randy were here, I could hear him right now saying, look, we don't need to study everything to death. We need to come to a point that we feel like we have sufficient information to act, and then we need to act to correct some of these challenges that we have, and then adaptively look to see if our actions were effective or not. And if they weren't effective, come up with additional actions. But don't sit on our hands and wait for things to happen. We need to act. So, thank you.
Very well done. And a wing and a prayer, you got her done. So Ken, the other piece of this whole storyline, of course, is how Bellingham Bay fits into a more regional view of what's happening with the Salish Sea. And over the course of the day, there have been a lot of those connections have been made. And I wonder if you can draw out of that some conclusions about kinds of research directions that might either integrate our work more or better, I guess, with that regional look, or perhaps downscaling some of the regional work so that it can answer some more specific questions around Bellingham Bay.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess the challenge is I get to summarize my own talk. That's harder than you think. Yeah, I think if you do a cold hard look at the vital sign wheel and the data there at even that broad rough scale, we're not winning. We're really not winning anywhere in Puget Sound, and that message and the way those data are displayed can seem simplistic to all of us or all of you who are really working on the fine details of this stuff. But that larger message is really important because that's what compels the decision makers and the funding agencies and the legislatures and Congress to help. So there's maybe a couple of messages that we pull out of this thing. One is there's a lot of competition for money and funding across all of society, and science is getting increasingly less of all of it. And then we have to be careful not to be viewed as fighting amongst ourselves so much that the message we deliver is confusing. So that's a compelling argument to work in partnerships and work collaboratively and work with one another. Also, when you look at, all those ecosystem components collectively, it leads you to ask better, sort of different and better questions, I think. And I think that supports what Eric has said and what Christopher has tried to demonstrate. It's, comparing the results and information we have across all these different components starts to sharpen the questions that we ask and the way we can focus our work. We need, if there's a couple of sort of themes across all the monitoring gaps that we've looked at, a couple of them are we need more and better spatial and temporal resolution for all of our measures. We need to apply the best tools that we have, the more powerful, newer tools. You heard a couple of people say, we've got discrete samples, we really need continuous monitoring. A lot of that is intended to better feed models that would be more useful and more reliable if we had those data sets to calibrate and feed those models. So, so the message is kind of working collaboratively and working in partnerships across all these multiple agencies and across all these scales of government. Not only tends to bring a better result to the work we're doing, but it's a more compelling argument to the people that are standing back there, that we're asking to help fund this stuff. So our job is to sharpen the questions. I think making them, to the degree we can improve how they're place-based, to make them important to the people of Bellingham, because it's their back door that we're talking about, is a really big advance, and one we haven't done very well yet. And I think what you've seen is an ability, an increasing ability to bring information down to that scale, but without losing sight that if we can't also package that message in a way that we can simply say, look, your recovery goal for Nooksack River is, 16,000 adult returning spawners, and we've got 400. If you can't do that too, then you lose that bigger argument that we also have to make.
Well, that's good. I summarized that by saying that we need unified messages and collaborative questions, and something about sharpening the questions and in improving their basis in place, and it seems to me that that's sort of the conversation today was kicked off with, and that is that we're here about that collaboration and opening those opportunities. So let me ask, are there some other thoughts that have come up as your collaborators have offered up their ideas? Do you have any last minute thoughts before I ask you to interact with the rest of the community of folks that are here?
Well, one of the things, a couple thoughts that came up during other sessions were I think there needs a whole lot more research on climate change and what that's going to impact a lot of things. It's certainly noticed to me that the projections we were given, I think somebody said they're in the median range, and depending who you look at, they're on the low range these days, and so I think we need to get a better handle on that. Other things that I heard today were all the stuff coming down the Nooksack River, whether it was sediments or phosphorus or nitrates. There was lots of concerns about when it hit the bay, but there wasn't much discussion of where it's coming from and what we can do about it upstream.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, I think I captured that, Carl. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Just one quick thing is, from a science perspective, is we can do a whole lot of science out here, and kind of echoing what Jeremy said about Randy's concern is, eventually we need to get the public will, and hopefully that public will to do something really good, really smart with our science. And this is an organization now, this group of people here, that can probably help bridge all of this information to the public and help garner that public will. Sometimes it takes, though, folks like yourselves who are on city and county councils to kind of help. But if that could be an outcome of this workshop and whatever we do with it the next couple of years, it's really important to educate the community members, engage them in some of our science like we try to do with community involvement, and just get that public will to start doing something with all this information. So,
can I add to this?
Yes, please.
So when you have the community supporting you, you can really also lower the cost of your measurements. We have sensors on the Victoria Clipper for free. We have other offers, you know, to place sensors because people go out with boats all the time. And that is really where you have the big price tag is, you know, sometimes just the logistical support to collect the data. So right there, you can already save big.
Okay, leverage data collection using
So use the mosquito fleet to get your data.
using the mosquito fleet. The question is whether we'll remember what that means. I think I will, for sure. Very nice. Well, thank you very much. And so I know that there are a lot more good ideas floating around, and I know that in conversations that I had with Bill and Renee and Gary and others in thinking through where this whole conversation went today, there was a recognition that there's this question about whether we queue up research to drive certain policy decisions. In other words, we know what policy questions are coming our way and what research do we need to answer those questions. And then there's the other side of the continuum in which we figure out what we need to, how things work and what the implications are, and then we advance policy solutions on the basis of that research. And it sounds sort of like this never-ending wheel, like the dog chasing its tail. But in fact, there is, in my mind, some method to the madness, and that is that in order to understand where we're going with these problems, we really do have to have this a proper mix of the basic research, the fundamental understanding of the natural systems, and then a real honest contemplation of what our footprint is, and then the political will to do something about it. And so I guess what I would encourage you to do is offer up the good ideas that you have at this point. Let's get them down here on paper, because inevitably there will be something in this that sticks, that feeds where we head next. So there's a bunch of folks out here that have done a lot of work. Let's hear from you. Somebody has to break the ice. Thank you.
Please consider planting industrial hemp.
Oh yes, the industrial hemp. Here it is.
Thank you. The reason is it pulls the toxins out of the soil, and the soil along the bay is, as we all know, very polluted. Even though some of it's covered with plastic, I'm sure the rain is continuing to wash it in the soil. It's being successfully used all over the world to remove toxins.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, ma'am, in the white jacket there.
I'm allowed white, so I don't need microphone.
You're
Okay.
on tape.
All right. I'm a fisheries student at ETC, and I think that we should, A, utilize more free labor as in college students. And also, I'm looking into a project of mycofiltration mushrooms. So I think maybe we should look into other natural ways of filtering out these toxins that are going into the Nooksack that also might help with some of the sediment as well.
I'll have you know that a number of us up here used to be graduate students, and I remember that being something akin to slave labor. Jeff, please, right over there in the red shirt.
Thanks. I think one of the things that could have tremendous value here is we have the opportunity to form a collaborative research community. And this is really the first time that a lot of people researching disparate parts of this ecology have gotten together in the same room. And before we all say goodbye, I think it would be extremely valuable to develop some discipline groups, if we could, or maybe over the email. It would be great if I had a question on nutrient hypoxia dynamics as relates to isotopic identification of source, which is a question that I do have. If I had a directory of people that I could ask about, if I could put that onto a web ring, and it might help to answer my question, but also to trigger some thinking in other people, right? So to be able to come together as a community, even though we all go off into our little cubby holes, I think that has a tremendous value, and I don't think we should let it slip by. Thanks.
Right here and then over there.
All this talk about coordination and collaboration, I think you're leaving out an important group, and that's the activist community. There's a number of us here, we're not scientists, but we're here to learn because we're activists, and we want to go back and we want to talk to our elected officials and bring that that public will that you're talking about. And that's a gap that's not being addressed. And one of the things that's really upsetting me is I come to seminars like this and I listen to this great science, and then I'll go to a city or a county council meeting and it's a different world. They're going ahead with land use planning that's completely disconnected to what we're talking about here. We haven't addressed the fact that there's a waterfront plan that Bellingham has in place that's going to substantially change the look and the ecological function of Bellingham Bay. There's going to be an overwater walkway. There's a lot of things going that are in the works we're not even talking about. And it would really help if some of the scientists could talk more directly and say more directly that these are human impacts that need to be addressed. Because unless you come out and say that very specifically, the public doesn't hear it, and it doesn't help the activist community go forward and attempt to bring your work and put it into practice.
Thank you, Wendy. And Renee, yeah.
So, on that note, and just to follow up with a lot of similar comments that I've heard just now and also throughout the day, that we have an opportunity here to get researchers together and talk about Bellingham Bay on a more regular schedule. And so one thing I'd like to throw out is to have the panelists that were up there today, and then add to that group of people other researchers that are doing work relevant to Bellingham Bay, and have them meet on a quarterly schedule or some similar schedule, just to talk about the research that they're doing. And you could have it set up so that if you have a quarterly schedule, say, you could have a quarter of them do a mini presentation on their research, so that they're all aware of what other people are researching, and there could be a synergistic benefit to that of being able to collaborate. And so there's different ways to set it up, but I just like that idea.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much, because in the end, it does go to what Wendy is asking for, and that is that at some point this body of work needs to grow some legs and sort of walk out into the community and be recognized as the basis on which policy decisions get made. And we want to do that in a real thoughtful way. And of course, researchers are, in my experience, always very concerned that their work isn't ready for prime time, and that there's always more work to be done. But a call to action is about knowing what is ready to be the basis for decision making, and when the right time is to advance that. So it does seem to me that there's something to this conversation. There was somebody else right behind Renee. Either way. You, sir, and then over behind Renee.
In connection with what Wendy said, I came here today hoping that somebody would bring up the lower Duwamish Waterway Group and the dredging job they did. We've got dredging issues here, and a scientific, and Jeremy mentioned siltation over the toxins, and that's the cheap option. But I'm not sure that's really going to help our bottom feeders. I think you've still got those PCPs that were down there from the 70s, and they're still going to get through, and we're still going to have a lot of problems. So, to me, the big issue is those fish. We got basically, if you can solve the problem for the Chinook, which goes all the way up the river, you can basically solve the problem for the other 4 species as well. And also for the bottom feeders, as I mentioned, we've got a real serious, halibut's a big problem. Of course, that can be an incidental catch issue. There's a lot of stuff connected with that. But the science involved in just the dredging issue, I think rather than a lot of money on a lot of the science that the feds are giving you people to do research, if some of that money could go into just dredging the hell out of this place, I think it would do a lot of good for a lot of fish. So that's my point. Now, with respect to upriver, I have a letter to the editor coming out within the next week in the Bellingham Herald, which I'm sure all of you read. And it's advocating real cops doing pollution enforcement. I'm suggesting that county cops have pollution sensors, and they actually do pollution sensing, and that state cops do visual observations, checking margins and irrigation ditch screens and a bunch of things like that. And that's stuff that they could do during dead periods and routine patrols. And the county right now has about only 2/3 of the number of deputies it needs, and that would help them in other areas as well if they increase their forces to do some of those things. So that's basically my suggestion, which is you got to enforce simple laws that are enforced. And Dale Carnegie said you can't tell a man he's wrong because he'll think of every reason he's right. But at the same time, every time one of you people does research, and I've got 2 master's degrees, I haven't done a lot of research, but getting other people to appreciate what you know, to understand, to comprehend what you have learned is virtually impossible. Somebody's got to make these tough decisions. To me, the big things are enforcement and dredging, and you do those 2 things, and I think fundamentally our fish will come back. Also, I want to mention one more thing. King of Fish, I think it's David R. Montgomery at UW, a geomorphologist. I've read that book 3 times. And hatcheries are a big problem. Hatcheries are have biological consequences with respect to wild fish. So this is another issue that really needs to be dealt with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to who am I looking at next?
And John, there's just a little bit more time.
Couple of more minutes.
The next session, I have very few comments, so we can continue this.
Okay.
Slightly different angle, and people can still add to this.
Perfect, perfect. Yes, please.
So, yeah, I'm a scientist, not an activist, but I'd like to sort of back up something that the activist spokesperson back there said, which is that I think people do hunger for actionable items that come out of something like this. And when scientists talk about a lot of different issues, people do get confused. And sometimes you do hear something that resonates with what can people locally do. Climate change comes up. And, you know, it's kind of big and scary, right? And Eric brought up, I think wisely, we've got the background sea level rise, we've got regional steric sea height, and then we've got the issue, the big scary, what if the West Antarctic ice sheet melts? Well, we can't do much about that here, though, can we? People get a little defeatist about it. But in the earlier session this morning, when I heard the local government speakers talking about the fecal coliform issue, and we heard about the shellfish, this is a real local problem that's got, if I understand the science correctly, and this is not my field, so I can back up a bit and say, if the scientists are right here and the fecal coliform is the issue, and it's a local river pollution problem, well, then this is something that this group could do. This group could say, hey, let's do a public information campaign. Because enforcement of septic system, and agriculture is one thing, but enforcement of local septic tanks is hard, right? But public information is a different issue. People want to do the right thing if they know they're doing it. I mean, you've got a lot of people in this region who are environmentally aware and want to do the right thing. They don't have tens of thousands of dollars in their bank accounts, but if they were aware of the financial things that incentives that are out there. They want to do the right thing. I think a lot of people just don't know. They live up in the mountains. They've got septic tanks. They don't know that they're hurting shellfish down in Puget Sound in the Salish Sea, right? This is a public information thing. And this, like you said, this group has resonance. This group has some power. It's not just the county and city managers. It's all of the scientists in this room. And I think that's what if I understand correctly, we're hearing people are asking for. So that's just one actionable item. You got to choose, right? There's lots of things going on, but there are some choices you can make. That's kind of like priority setting. Out of all the gaps you have, what can you do where locals can have some control and feel some empowerment and feel good about doing something and make some change?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that view, because it's something we all struggle with, that is taking these highly technical analyses, highly technical ideas, and turning them into something that people can act on at the local level and feel some kin to being part of the solution. Pinky, council member, yes.
I serve on city council, and I think I feel like Carl does. I have more questions today than I do answers. And I'm very action oriented. I like to come out of the day going, what can I do? How can I share a message? And how can I make a difference? And one of the things that I would like to see come out of all the things that we do today is how can we share a message? And how can we move people towards action? And right now, I feel like I have a lot of questions and I don't know what that is, and obviously not everyone does here either, but I would like to see that and provide direction for us as elected officials on how we can support action and what that means for us here.
That sounds like a sort of a policy group. Policy group. Question mark. Okay. Thank you very much, Council Member Vargas. Yes. Anybody else? Because we're just about ready to wrap this. One more? Okay, we've got one more in the back.
Hi, thank you. Just to follow on what Pinky had mentioned, I think one of the important things coming out of today is the nexus in the data gaps, where when we have data gaps in physical processes or biological processes, where are there overlaps that we can fund in a more holistic way so that the city and the county council or other funding agencies aren't funding one project and then another project and then another project, but they kind of see the continuum on where the data needs or the data gaps are, and then when we fund them, we see the picture become clearer, not just in one realm, but in kind of the consequence of one project being funded in another and another. We see the cumulative bridging of those data gaps. And one thing that I was considering is where the research on physical processes, where we don't know where all the sediment inputs are and where we don't have data on wave action, can we, as local funding agencies or state funding agencies, can they kind of can Bellingham Bay come up with a holistic research picture of where we would like to see those projects be funded in a more holistic manner? I'd say just for the local government folks, how you can fund these projects in a cumulative way is really important to take away from this. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Is there one more? We're done. Okay, Wendy, you're gonna get the last word, as usual. It better be good.
Oh, that's a lot to live up to. One thing that I kept on hearing today that didn't get reflected in the notes is that Bellingham Bay is unique. I mean, we all live here and love this place, but it has unique pollution problems. There's something going on in the benthos that's unique. There's a nitrogen cycling issue that's unique. And we also have Western Washington University here, and I would hope that researchers there more of them would take on the challenge of kind of addressing the unique problems in Bellingham Bay.
Thank you very much, Wendy. That was a good place to end. I mean, we do recognize that this is a unique environment that that we're working in, a unique place that we live, a place that we're somehow very connected to, and that's the reason why we're all here today. So I think that was a great conversation. I've got a nice long list. I actually have, while standing here, thought of a couple of more ideas, some things that came up that Jim brought up about wave action and things like that that aren't on this list. So I think what we'll do is go back and contemplate how we can work this up and circulate it and make sure that, no pun intended, and ensure that everybody gets another opportunity to have some input. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Sue, I think, to close out, or should...
I'm actually not going to totally close out, and you guys can actually stay here right now because you may have some additional suggestions to offer in. But we have one more session here that is on some suggestions that have already come up for ongoing collaboration. So let me pull that up. You didn't? I didn't hit delete. I just reduced it. Let's see. And this session, when we as the planning team were putting this together, we intentionally decided we wanted to make our remarks here very brief because it was once again one of those opportunities. We thought we have all sorts of great expertise and minds in this room right now, so we want to hear more from you than have us tell you some of the initial ideas we thought about for how we might take this conversation today beyond today. And we've talked a little bit about that, so you may have covered everything that you think should be said about this, but I'm going to give you some of the ideas that we came up with, and you guys may be able to possibly add to this or expand on it, and then we're going to open it back up again for one final round for you guys to give us some suggestions. And I guess I want to start this slideshow. And I would also say that Austin Rose, who is going to do this with me and cover a little bit more information in depth on websites as possibilities for how we might use them more effectively for communication and collaboration, she is sick. So I didn't actually gain a great deal of expertise in all the website options, so I'm going to just say something very brief about that, which will put it back in your hands just that much sooner. So one of the things that we got from you and we heard from you actually through the registration was, how do you currently get information about these topics that we're listening to today? And there was a whole variety of sources that were mentioned in the comments that you provided. Newspapers, local state agencies, organizations, nonprofits, your colleagues, a lot of word of mouth, going to conferences, things like that. Actually, nothing really surprising and nothing that just jumped to the top of the list as, if we use this, we would be able to more effectively get information out to the broader community and work more effectively together. So it still begs the question of, what do we want to do and how do we want to move beyond today in a more collaborative way? So here's some of the thoughts that we as a planning team had about this. So today we've crammed in a lot of information, hopefully a lot of food for thought around this particular State of the Bay Symposium. So we would much appreciate your perspective on, do we want to periodically do something like that? This, again, do we want to expand the geographic area just as the sort of the red circles are there? There's been some suggestion that we might want to go up and south a little bit more along the coastline, maybe include the San Juan Islands. We know that a lot of this gets discussed at Salish Sea. Do we want to alternate somehow these events with that? Anyway, we're very interested in your thoughts on this specific activity and whether or not it's worth doing again or doing again in some modified way, which could also be, picking particular topics that we would be more narrow and there'd be more time for discussion and things like that. This actually speaks to one of the suggestions that Renee brought up, which we actually have formed a sort of data research team that is going to be getting together on some sort of periodic basis to share information about what's going on and to talk about how we might prioritize. And we're looking to try and flesh out how we might do that more effectively. We're still in the very beginning stages of that, so this is your chance to influence what that might look like. Yeah, please do.
So that was a great suggestion. One thing, I've talked to a number of people who are interested in being, I've talked to a number of people who are interested in being part of this data team. One thing everyone has pretty much said is that we want it to be challenge or action oriented. It needs to, we don't want to just get together and talk more and share what we're doing. We want to come together on a common goal or a common theme and address that and work towards it, because our time is valuable and we want it to yield things. So there are definitely people interested who are doing work here to be part of this data team. We're just trying to figure out what that's going to look like.
Right. Thanks, Jude. And I am going to let you talk about this one as well, the site profile.
Yeah, just briefly, this is something that anyone who's done work, or grad students or students, or anyone who's done work in Bellingham Bay, it's really hard to find information on Bellingham Bay, and it's not in a central place, and it's sort of piecemeal. For a long time, I've wanted to start compiling what we know, what's the state of our knowledge of Bellingham Bay. And I've talked to Bert Weber a number of times about this, who would be a great person to get involved in a project like that. But the idea of creating something, he says that's, I mean, by his own admission, you would, so that this becomes a dynamic, living, community-based document that, much like the PSEMP document that emerges, you know, what do we know, what is going on in Bellingham Bay, and can we keep that research synthesized in a place that everyone can go to? So that was the idea behind this site profile, modeled after other research reserves that do a similar thing.
An e-newsletter, some way to provide the community with information on all of the things that are going on, was an additional suggestion. We know there's a lot of those that are already out there on different topics. This could be a synthesis of what's going on around specifically this geographic area. And the resource directory, which is sort of a precursor, I would say, to what Jude is talking about. And I wanted to mention this for a couple of reasons. On the State of the Bay website right now, we actually have a link on the left-hand side to the current version of a resource directory. And one value you may have in that immediately is it will be a place where you can go, and we are compiling abstracts, contact information, bios, titles for all of the speakers you heard today. We have also tried to summarize what our best attempt to understand what's going on in terms of other research, because it was, in fact, it was one of the things that when we were in the process of doing this, we said, there's a lot going on here, and how are we possibly going to pick who comes and speaks in front of you today versus the people that, you know, are obviously doing great work, but we don't have time to hear from everybody. So this is just the current version of a resource directory. It could be very much modified. It could include links to some of the sites that you might be interested in, and we saw a lot of websites show up today. That's something that might be more immediately usable and then could evolve into the site profile kind of idea that Jude just talked about a little bit more. What was all right, so this, I'm going to skip over all of these. This is what Austin was going to talk about in terms of there's all sorts of websites that are out there, and some of them really try to pull together and synthesize information on all sorts of different topics related to that include Bellingham Bay issues. So the question, one of our questions is, should we do a better job of building those websites or communicating that they exist to the broader community so that they can more quickly get to places where they would like to go? And now, and that's just how quick that was. I know this seems impossible, but so now we wanted to open it up one more time for any other additional comments or suggestions from you. And I am going to pull that list up that John had and ask John to come back up, because he was doing a great job typing, and add to it if you have any additional suggestions. He didn't know I was going to ask him that, but I was admiring his ability to type and talk.
Good for something, anyway. All right, make me type and talk.
Just for the record, I'm Larry Davis. I'm one of the members of the Board of Supervisors for the Whatcom Conservation District, and almost completing my 6th year. I will apply for another 3-year term because my position's appointed by the State Conservation Commission. I got a couple things to say about communication, because that's one of my passions. And I'm going to say something that I think probably reflects a large percentage of the residents of Whatcom County. I don't work the land for a living, and I don't work the water for a living. I got a lot of valuable information today, but one of the first things I'm doing when I go home is get the Google dictionary out and figure out what a number of these acronyms and terms mean, because I don't have a background in science, etc. I had a prior career in Olympia as a policy staffer for 26 years, so that's the bent that I'm listening, that's the filter I listen through. So I could not agree more with Christopher and this little thing that I grabbed a copy of. Graphics to portray text, do not underestimate the value of that as a communication tool or strategy. And I will also say that there are some terms on here, and visually it really helped me. I'm just one of those people that I don't always understand where all the arrows go and what necessarily they mean. But the concept of graphics like this is very powerful. I also really believe in the power of analogies and metaphors to reach, quote unquote, the average person, because that's really how I think of myself, because I don't have a background that a lot of people, the staff that I work with have, and a number of people that I got from the questions and presentations today. So turn it into language, somebody already mentioned it, that your neighbor can understand. And that's how you'll engage people long term. Thanks.
Could I sort of add to that? I think also stories have an amazing power. If you can turn this into a story, that's how humans evolved to communicate. And you should tap into that. So not just collecting all the information, make a story out of it. If it's visual, if it's verbal, make it personal, make a story, bring it into sort of the human scale that people think.
And to add on to that, additionally, I think that in addition to just STEM, adding it and making it STEAM, including the arts, we have Western Washington University as well as other local colleges around here that have art departments, communication departments, and reaching out to them and involving that in their curriculum, giving them a challenge, saying, hey, we have this, help us visualize it, and partnering up with those academic resources that we have really close by. Thanks.
Okay, I think Wendy in the back, and is there anybody else after that? Because I think it's about time to wrap up. So, Wendy, please, yeah.
The issue came up, at what level should this be organized at? And I would advocate for organizing it at a county level. I know a lot about Whatcom County, but I don't know a lot about Skagit County or the other counties. And the other reason I think that's important is that's the way state law organizes planning. Under the GMA, we go through a comp plan update, and that's the level that we need to look at the science and incorporate into our planning, which is what we're talking about. So just in terms of science interacting with the actual land use planning, I think a county level approach would be the best.
Thank you very much. Closing remarks?
Thanks, John. Boy, we're going to be done just about in time. So I'm going to conclude by asking you a question. What happened on January 22nd, this day, 160 years ago? It was the Treaty of Point Elliott, the Mukilteo Treaty, the treaty that Randy Linville told us about, the treaty that led to the Bolt decision and the Martinez decision, the treaty that Billy Frank calls the Bill of Rights for the tribes in this area. It is the underlying policy document underneath everything we're talking about here today. And I think it's great that we're actually here on that day. And as the local officials reminded us, it really is a great document to help us as we do this work, because it really does reinforce what everybody was talking about today. Ken said that we're not winning. But I think there's also a lot of hopeful signs about what we know, what we're learning, about the work we're doing, and the capacity that we're building. So hopefully in the future we will start to win. So it sounds a little gloomy, but I hope you are getting I hope you feel the hope that's in that too. And Bert reminded us of that in his messages about the things we've done already. So with that, I hope you'll all stick around. You'll go dig into the posters that are out there. You'll have a glass of beer, network with your friends and colleagues, and thank you for all joining us. We're concluded.
You've been watching a presentation from the State of the Bay Symposium held in January 2015 in Bellingham, Washington. If you'd like to see the other 6 presentations from this symposium, please visit the City of Bellingham's YouTube site, www.youtube.com/cityofbehamwa.